I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this afternoon. Hopefully you'll find the session informative. So we'll go ahead and kind of jump into things. And just a couple of reminders before we do that. If you do have to mute your line, please put us on mute and not on hold. There is a chat feature if you are joining us via the webinar, and if you could use that to write any questions or comments you have as we work through the presentation, that would be great. And it is our goal to obviously spend time answering any specific questions that you have as we work through today's presentation and the issue. So with that, I am going to just quickly review the agenda, and then I'm going to turn things over to a colleague of ours, Leanne Candora from HSRI, and she'll walk us through the rest of the presentation. So we want to spend some time talking with you about the goals of this last testing phase, and then we want to get into some file naming and technology requirements, a review of the testing instructions. I think what I'm most excited for is giving you a demo of the portal, and then we want to talk about some helpful tips and reminders, a review of the timeline, and then leave time at the end for any specific questions. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Leanne.
Thank you, Karen Lee. So yes, this is Leanne Candora, HSRI. Many of you have probably been receiving some emails from me over the past few weeks. If you were the main contact at your facility, you should have received testing instructions yesterday morning. If you are the lead contact who had been receiving emails from me and did not receive the instructions, please shoot me an email after this webinar just so I can make sure you have those in your hand. We'll also show you where there's a copy of those instructions in the portal, so you can always have them handy. I do know that a few people, my message got rejected through their mail servers, but we've been working to get them those instructions in their hand, and I appreciate people that have really been able to get in and at least try to register at this point in the process, because I think that we're going to be able to get you in and answer any questions that you have while you've been working through that process. So as Karen Lee mentioned, we are now in the third phase of testing. This is in a very exciting time for us. It's like users in the wild, really. So we have taken time over the past couple months to support any questions around file format and file layout. We know there was some changes to Chapter 241 that impacted how people's files were being prepared. And I know a number of you have been working with Dave Vincent to review at least your file structure and layout and file naming. So I know that's been really helpful to start working through that part of the process. And then I do want to say thank you to our small group of beta testers who were given access to our demo portal a few weeks ago and started to get in there and see how it was set up, to start submitting some files and to see how the new process is going to work, and gave us some really valuable feedback that we had incorporated to the test system that you'll be using over the next month. And I also want to say I appreciate any of the beta testers who registered for that system and now have had to re-register in the new system. We kind of restructured the registration to make sure that especially those hospital systems had access to all the different hospitals within their system, and they would be able to view that information as part of the portal in a more seamless way. And so that is one of the reasons we are asking people to re-register. All of the registration information that you're entering now and the different contacts that you're setting up in the test system, we will be using for the launch of the live system in July. So you will not have to go through this process again. So we're going to get you in there, get you user accounts, and those will be set, so we will not have to repeat this process. I just wanted to take a few minutes to review the goals of the Phase 3 testing. The first is just successful registration in the portal, that you go in, get an account, that you're able to then, especially for those who are administrators of your hospital or hospital system that you're able to add additional system users, and those users are then able to get registered, and then you can start setting up your roles. And again, we'll go all through this in a little more detail today. Then the next goal is to review your location's registration information, which includes contact info, user accounts, even hospital addresses, making sure that we have all of our information as up to date as possible as we go through this next phase. The next big goal is to be able to successfully submit inpatient and or outpatient file into the portal. And we were suggesting that you use your Q4 2015 data, since this will be the first required time period that will need to be submitted starting in July. So we'll go again into that in more detail, but we had suggested that that may be the file that you try to get successfully submitted. The next will be viewing and resolving the data submission validation issues. And again, the system is different than the prior system in that when you submit the file, it will be processed through a set of validation issues that are both structural, meaning that the file itself is set up according to Chapter 241 requirements, the field lengths are correct, and then it'll go through some content validations to understand if what is in the content of the file is what we're expecting. And this information will all be available in the portal. There's a number of ways that you can interact with these validations, but as we've mentioned, I think probably since last summer, we do not have an editing feature for the data in this system. But what we're anticipating is that once you get your validation profile set up, so we understand what to expect from your data, and that there are no real content issues that would not be meeting the requirements of Chapter 241, that it should be an easy submission transition process through this new portal and setting the expectations of what is in your data and us understanding what may be a little different about your facility's data, so you may be able to bypass some of these validations in the future. And finally, the real big part of this testing is for you to be able to provide feedback on any major issues or blockers that you find while you're working in the portal, the submission process, or even we want to know things about your own system that may be barriers for you to meet the standards as we've described them. And so we really welcome feedback at the moment you need to provide it. So if you're in the portal and something happens that's unexpected, please use the help desk. They've been there working with the beta testers. I feel that we get a number of great comments about our ability to respond quickly to questions and enabling you to continue moving through your process in the portal. So please send feedback immediately if you've been blocked by an issue, and also at the end I just welcome overall feedback. That can either be sent to me or through the help desk, so we can ensure that when we go to the live system in July that we're really able to accommodate the ways in which the hospitals are working with the system. And if there's some changes that need to be made, that we'll have some time to make that. So the next portion, I just want to review a little bit about the file naming convention, some file name examples, and some of the technology requirements. I think if you attended past webinars, I've gone over this a couple times already, so I appreciate you sitting through it again. I know this is something that is a little different than you've done in the past as far as file naming goes, and really the reason that we're implementing this is so we can make sure that we can really track your information in a way that really benefits you as a submitter to knowing what's in, when it has been submitted, and when it's been accepted. And then for us to be able to only be asking you for files that you haven't submitted, not asking you to resubmit files that you may have already done. So we're going to just go over that for a few minutes. So the file naming convention, I know at first it can look a bit complex, but we're hoping after you get practiced it a few times, it'll become like second nature. So we'll try to set up the example as clear as possible. So the first portion of the file name will be your MHDO assigned ID. for the purposes of reporting or your inpatient and outpatient data. The ID must correspond to the MHDO ID that you also include in your header file. These must be the same. Each hospital and provider-based clinic will have their own ID, and if a provider-based outpatient clinics are submitting with their hospital outpatient data, the hospital's ID can also be used in the location of service field. So we're going to go through that a bit more in detail as we move through the slides, but these IDs can also be found in the system. So when you're registering, this will be part of reviewing all your information. All these IDs are clearly labeled in the portal system. The next is the data stream. Data submitters will have one or more data streams, and the streams will be denoted by a 2-digit number starting with 01. The leading 0 is required in this. MHDO will provide all submitters with the data stream numbers that they should use for submission. So again, when you're logged in the portal, you'll see this information for each of your different file types, what data stream this should be submitted on. And again, this is used for our tracking purposes to make sure that we're recording and crediting and validating against the right information. It may also be the case that a hospital may need separate data streams, such as an outpatient reoccurring, and these may be defined as needed with incremental stream numbers. And again, that'll be information that we can add and manage in the portal, and you'll see a place to do that. So as you notice, as we walk through, all these different the information types are separated by underscores. So the next is number 3. It's the data start period month, and number 4 is the data end period month. We are allowing the submission of monthly or quarterly data files, and so the first date should be the start month, and the second date should be the end month. So it's a 2-digit century, 2-digit calendar year, and 2-digit month. Next is the file type, and this should be indicated either IP or OP, and the provider-based clinics will be under outpatient because that's the set of validations that we use against those data types. So that helps us just ensure we're using the correct file type validations when you submit your data. The sequence number is used to differentiate files that are otherwise identical, that would otherwise have identical names, and this will only occur when a facility submission is of sufficient size to require compression into volumes, or occasionally during a system change when parts of the same submission are derived from separate sources. And again, this requires a leading 0. So this should, for the most part, be 01, unless, again, you need to separate submissions for a variety of reasons. And finally, the version number. This is used to differentiate multiple submissions for the same filing period. This is a common occurrence in the new system and will be used to submit corrected data. So as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the system itself does not allow editing of data. So if you submit your file and you get some error that blocks us from being able to submit to accept the file, such as the structure of the file is not correct, you would need to resubmit and increment that version number so we understand that's the second version of the file for that same period. So you will use this quite frequently, especially in the beginning when you're just trying to get your file submissions to meet the requirements of the new system. And finally, the file extension. This is something that doesn't necessarily need to be entered. This will be generated from the text file. So initially, this will be a text file extension when you create your file. And then once it's zipped and compressed, it will have the file extension of the zip the zip compression tool that you're using, such as 7-zip. So this is an example. So the same facility, in the first example, is submitting monthly. As you can see, the start date and the end date for this inpatient file are the same. And then for the second is the same facility who submits the file quarterly. As you can see, the start date and the end date are separated. One is January and one is March. So that would be for the first quarter. But otherwise, the file names are the same. So as I just mentioned a moment ago, all files submitted to the portal will need to be encrypted and compressed. This helps to ensure the security of the file when it's being transmitted. There's a number of standard industry tools such as WinZip or 7-Zip, which you may already have in your workplace. Each file that is uploaded should be added in a separate zip archive. So if you're submitting, say your hospital has an inpatient, outpatient file, they must be each in their separate zip archive, and they must be encrypted. Not all of the compression tools will offer encryption, but the examples that we gave do. And the unique encryption password is provided to you in the portal. And we will go through that when we are doing our portal demo, where you can find that. But that should be used for all of your file submissions, so we're able to unencrypt it once it makes its way into the portal. Here are some browser settings for technology requirements. Using these settings will help optimize your experience in the portal. So if you're using a different version of the browsers that's listed, certain features of the portal may not work. So again, please, if you ever have issues in the portal and need to contact the help desk or something you don't feel is rendering correctly, always providing information about which browser you're using is helpful, because this will also help ensure that if we need to fix something, we'll make sure we test it in your browser. And then the next one is just the email notifications. This provides the address of the portal that email notifications will be coming from. So when you are in the portal and say you've submitted a file and the file finishes validation, you will be receiving an email, and this is the address that the email will be coming from. And we want to make sure that you are able to receive these emails so you understand what's going in the portal. And the first time this will happen is actually when you register. Your registration will need to be approved. If you're the administrator for your hospital, HSOI will be approving those, and you'll receive an email once they're approved, and it will be coming from this address. And if you're a system user, then your administrator for your hospital will be approving. And again, the approval email will be coming from this address. Finally, I just wanted to provide just a little information about the data warehouse security and storage and how we ensure the security of the information. So during file submission, the data warehouse portal uses the SSL protocol, and all the data are being transferred directly to servers controlled by NORC at the University of Chicago. And the data are validated and stored entirely within their secure data enclave, which complies with all federal information security requirements. Okay, so the next section is just a review of the testing instructions. I did want to just pull up, let me just switch out the applications, a copy of the testing instructions. Again, they should have gone out yesterday morning to anyone that was receiving my emails previously who had been identified as a hospital administrator. Let me just stop sharing this one. Okay. And what I indicated in the email is that I was hoping other system users within your system would also share these instructions. This gives everything from the web address for how to access the portal to details on how to get your account set up. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk through the instructions, but I really want to make sure we spend a bulk of our time today doing the demo of the portal, because I'm assuming seeing the actual portal will be more helpful than me going through the instructions. So there was just a little bit of an introduction paragraph here, which also then contains the table of contents. One of the key things for your either hospital system or hospital is that the administrator for your facility should be the first one to register, because they are then the one who can approve other users. Otherwise, if I get a request for approval from somebody else at a hospital, I will have to reach out to them and confirm if they're the administrator or not if I don't have them on my list. So it helps with the order of things, just to make sure we get the people in the right roles, and I really just want to be able to hand over the account to the hospital administrator so they can then decide on the roles of the users within their system. So the table of contents is right here. We're going to be quickly just going through. We already went through the goals of testing, so I can skip that. I'm also going to review the timeline again at the end of today's presentation, so I'm going to kind of breeze over that for the purposes of reviewing this document, and then I'm just going to talk briefly about the registration and login process before we go right to the portal, and then talk about some of the menu systems. So we really wanted to make sure this one document had almost all the information you would need outside of the portal itself. So again, as I mentioned, it contains some of the goals and timelines. And here's the most important part of the document. It actually gives you the URL of the hospital portal website. And this will, I believe, be the URL for when we also go live. So the next section is just about creating an account. When we're going into the portal, you will have to click on the word register, and this will get you set up to creating an account. One of the important things when you create your account is you'll be asked to select a hospital or hospital system. Now, even if you're part of a hospital system, but you are not, but you only have authority over the hospital, one of the hospitals within the system, you should go through the hospital drop down instead of the hospital system drop down. So as an example, if you are Mercy Hospital, part of Eastern Maine Health System, but you'll only be working within the Mercy Hospital system, you should select Mercy Hospital instead of Eastern Maine Health System. So then once you're finished the registration process, you will need to wait for an email saying that your registration has been accepted, and that will give you information of how then to go log into your account. If you are the first person that approval comes here through HSRI, where I check you off an existing list that I have of who should be approved as administrators, and then after you have an administrator, the system users will then be approved by that administrator. And so it's almost like it's our ability to hand over control of the system to that administrator. There can be multiple administrators, and then they can also assign roles, which include a submitter, which then gives you the ability to go in and submit files. So again, here's some more information about system logins, and then confirming and managing users. And you can add as many users as you'd like. One of the features is really just having a section where you can record different people who might want information out of the system, like reports or general emails. And so you can just add them as users who may not have submitter rights. So when you're on the home page of the system, there's some quick link icons at the front, and there'll also be a notification screen that we will periodically post messages that the hospital users can view, and we can also do specific hospital messages. The emails that come out of the system are different than the notifications. So if you're getting an email that your file has been validated, that will not automatically appear on the notification screen. It's really, those are messages from us as the overall system administrators. So there will be a hospital menu, and if you're not part of a hospital system, this will be the main menu that you're going to work from. This will give you a summary of all the information about all your facilities and any campuses that they might have. It also gives you a list of all the contacts where you can then go in and view and edit and update and delete contacts within your system. So those who are part of a hospital system rather than a single hospital will have a company menu. And this will display menu about the hospital system and give the users the ability to go in and look at information about individual hospitals. And there's also company level contacts versus hospital contacts. You can have those both separate and see which ones are unique to which system or which hospital. So once all the hospital information or system and company information has been reviewed, you can start preparing to submit your test files. What we have got, the submission side of the system is not working just at the moment. We wanted people to focus on getting registered, but starting tomorrow morning, you can also start submitting your files. So if you already have your files and you're ready to go, just I would say today, if you have time, just recheck that they're all named correctly, do any other last prep work, and starting tomorrow morning, you can start uploading those files into the system. And this is just a little more information about the test data. As I mentioned before, we are suggesting that you use the fourth quarter of 2015 in order to make sure these files are fully prepared for the system launch in July. Once testing is complete, these test files will be deleted. So luckily this next section I can skip over because I already went over it in the PowerPoint earlier. This just goes through the detail of the file naming convention. And again, this is encryption and compression. This gives more detail about the encryption and compression. So finally, you've made it all the way through preparing your files, naming it, encrypting, compressing it. This is where you'll find information about how to upload your file. If you are not in a data submitter role, you will not be able to upload files and you will not be able to see the password needed for encryption. So make sure that if you're an administrator that you assign these roles correctly and that the people who you are expecting to submit your data have a check mark in that role in the system, and we'll include that when we go through the demo. And then checking your file for validation issues so it's successfully uploaded into the system. You can navigate to the history, the history menu screen to track the progress of your file. And you can see the status of pass, failed, or error, or processing. Processing usually takes under an hour, but we guarantee it within 24 hours. And the portal will automatically send you an email once this processing is complete, so you can know when to go back into the portal to check. And if this seems to have errored out or it takes longer than 24 hours, please contact the help desk so we can investigate. And so as I marked here, the data submission functionality is currently just disabled, and we will open this up tomorrow morning and post a notification in the portal. Right now there's a notification in there saying that portion isn't working, but it will be first thing tomorrow. One of the things you can do while you're waiting for that is you can go through and look at the full list of validation rules that are under submission, the submission menu, and it will list every rule for both the inpatient file, the outpatient file, and other structural errors. All validation rules are in place for system testing, except there's just a couple of the ad hoc rules that we're going to be working through over the next week or so, and we will also post a notification when those are up. And you can see when you go in and look at the list what types of rules these are. The rules that are really we're working through the final stages of, for example, would be we're validating some of the ICD-10 codes to make sure that if they're they're only applicable to a single sex, like male or female, that they're only being applied to that. So it's some more of the more detailed data validation rules that we're just ensuring that they're working 100% correctly before they're fully implemented. But there's a couple hundred rules that are in place at the moment that will be fully functioning when you can start submitting this information tomorrow. Finally, the validation failure review. So if you do have a failed status on your file, you'll be able to start working through and seeing all the different types of issues and getting all the details right in the portal. And this just gives more detail about all the issue types that you'll be viewing, and we'll give you a complete tour of this with examples when we do the demo. And then finally, there is a reports menu, and this menu is where we're going to build out the information about the submission history. So for your hospital or hospital system, you'll be able to see all the data that were due and in what part in the process those files are at, so you can understand if you're meeting the submission deadlines. Again, these reports are currently being built out and will be functioning for the go-live period, and I think along the way we'll actually be soliciting some feedback from the hospital data users to make sure that these reports are going to meet their needs. But at this point, really all the information that you need will be in the file submission history section. The reports is really accumulation of this information over a number of months, which you will not have that history as part of testing. You will be able to submit, as I'm going to say, as many files as you'd like during the testing period. It'll probably be many versions of the same file potentially, but we don't have any sort of limit on how much you can test during this period. And finally, feedback and questions. The help desk, this is their email. They'll be able to assist resolving issues or getting information from other appropriate staff members. And then I've also given my email address. I would be very happy to receive any other feedback that you might have during the end of this testing period or even while it's going on. As I mentioned during phase 2 testing, some of the feedback I did receive is that the system was easy to use, which for us is one of the best things that we can hear. So please give feedback, good or bad. It's very welcome. Okay, so it's that time where you get to, I get to stop talking, I think. Let me just switch back over to the PowerPoint. And then I believe we're getting to the portion that everyone's waiting for. We're going to actually go and do a demo of the portal. And I'm going to be handing this over to Steve Noyes, who's really from HSRI, who's been the lead engineer and programmer in designing the portal. So he really is the best person to be walking us through. So Steve, I am handing you over controls now. And we will take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. I'm going to start to share, as Leanne said, my name is Steve Noyes. I'm from HSRI. I'm going to give you a little tour of the portal. So let me start sharing my screen. And I'll wait for some confirmation from people when they're able to see the portal web page, the login screen.
I see it. Yes.
Okay. Sounds like we're there. So I'm going to take it from the very beginning. Leanne covered everything in general. I'm just going to exercise all of the key pieces that are available. So you can, if you haven't already touched the system, this will be how it will all work for you. So to start out, I'm going to begin with registration. This will be the first thing that you will do. You'll arrive at the landing page, which will ask you to log in, but if you don't have an account, you can click on register here. Looks like there's also a register link up on top. So when I click that, this is one of the things that Leanne mentioned. The first thing we'll be asking you to do is declare your affiliation, whether or not that's with a single hospital, and you just pick that from the list, or if you're associated with a hospital system which consists of more than one hospital. So in most cases, I think people will be affiliated with a single hospital, so I will use that as an example. I will scroll down and choose our test hospital for this. I'll go click on next. At this point, I'm going to quickly fill in some information. And go next, and at this point, I'll pick myself a username. I think I've registered more than once, so I'm going to go with SNOS33. And complete. So now at this point, once I've submitted my registration, as Leanne mentioned, if you're the first person registering, Leanne at HSRI will be notified that you've registered, and she will approve that account. If an administrator has already registered for your hospital, that administrator will be notified via email that you've registered, and they will go in and approve you. And I'm going to now show how that approval will work. So I am registered as an administrator of the MHDO Test Hospital, so I will log in. And so as Leanne mentioned, here's the home page. We have notifications and some quick links to some of the more common activities that you might want to perform when you're in the portal. So let me quickly move into the confirmation of registration. So for a hospital administrator, so this is someone who's authorized to manage accounts, will have this users menu. And in general, you'll get an email that someone has signed up. You'll come in to the pending screen and see that there are people who are awaiting approval. I'm going to look at the one that I just submitted. And at this point, I mean, you can change this at any point, but at this point, the administrator will have the ability to assign different user roles to this user. So if I'm going to be allowed to submit data, I would click on the data submitter role and then approve it. And that will mean that that user, which has now disappeared from the pending users list and has now moved its way over to the approved users list. You can see that I guess this is the middle one. I'm a submitter, and I will be able to actually submit a file in the portal. As Leanne mentioned, there can be more than one administrator role. You can be a submitter and an administrator. You might have neither of those roles assigned to you, in which case you'll merely be able to view all of the information that's in the portal, but not edit or make submissions in general. And one more.
Steve, can I ask you one question? Can you zoom into your screen a little bit? It appears a little small on mine. You might be able to adjust that just as we're going through so people might be able to read some of the text.
I can try.
It might be just in your web browser. There probably is an adjustment.
Let me...
Try holding down your control key and spin your wheel on your mouse.
Ah, that's another easier way to do it. There we go. Thank you.
Great tip. Thank you. Has that improved things for people? I hope.
Yep.
Okay. So I was going to mention the one last bit under the users menu that administrators will have access to is this invite function, where you can merely type the name of somebody who you have an interest in registering for the portal, click invite, and then the system will generate an email that's sent to that email address, inviting them to come and register an account, at which point you'll be able to approve that account. So that is users and roles and approvals. Another thing that administrative users will be responsible for and have access to comes under the hospital menu, and this is contacts. Now contacts, every user who registers in the system automatically gets a contact, and they get a contact type of user by default. That's checked. But you can also add in contacts contact information for people at your facility who MHDO might want to send out targeted communications to. And these people don't necessarily don't need to have a login account to the portal, but you can add them as people that we might reach out to about general issues with the portal, about compliance or submission. And here we can the administrator can feel free to check off different kinds of contact types so that when we make targeted communications, we can access these contacts and filter them appropriately and get messages out to the right people. The MHDO does ask that each hospital provide at least one contact who is responsible for compliance, one person we can contact regarding submissions, and also a CFO contact. So that is contacts. So now we're going to get, I think, to the more interesting piece, which is if we go under the hospital menu and then click on Summary. So this is my fake test hospital information. We're asking that administrators go in and verify their their hospital's MPI and tax ID. Right here, you can see this is called key. I think I might change this to actually say encryption key, so it's a little more explicit. This is the encryption key that you will use when you are compressing your files for submission. I'll mention that again later. As we can see in the summary of this test hospital, the hospital has a single main campus, and that campus has an MHDO assigned ID of 200,000. Here's the address. We'd ask that you review that address information and make sure it's correct for your hospital. Here are the data streams that are associated with this hospital campus. We have data stream 01 for inpatient data and data stream 02 for outpatient data, if your facility does indeed also submit outpatient data. I think in general most do. The registration information, this summary information is provided hierarchically. So associated with this main campus, there is an outpatient provider-based clinic with a very interesting name of test. You can see that facility's MHDO assigned ID and its address. And there is also a corresponding data stream established for that outpatient clinic. So the data streams kind of, I guess that leads me right into the most important part of the demonstration, which is actually submitting data. So when you submit data, it will correspond, your file submission should correspond by its naming convention to the MHDO ID of a given facility and a data stream number and file format, as we discussed before. So let me go to the submission menu where we can see about submitting a file. So to submit a file, we would click on Submit File. And at the top, this is the button you choose to go browse for the file that you've named and prepared and zipped with the encryption key. So I'm going to go find a file, and I'm going to use this one. So when I select a file that's been properly named, you can see that the system parses out each of the pieces and shows you what it's detected about it, and then gives you a nice happy message down here that it understands to which data stream you're submitting the file, and enables the submit button, at which point it's ready to be submitted, and you press submit. And it's a rather small file, so that went very quickly. Your file might take a little bit longer to process. So the file has been submitted, and I can prove that by just quickly visiting the submission history page. So this is the page that shows you the files you've submitted over time. And as we can see, I submitted that file, and it is now queued. So our system, our back-end system, shortly should recognize that a file has come in, and it will start going through the processing pipeline. And that pipeline consists of first unzipping the file, making sure that it unzips it with the encryption password that we showed there. Once it's unzipped, then it's going to undergo structural validations. And if structural validations pass, that means we're able to, there aren't any flaws with the structure of the file. We're then able to load up the file into our staging tables, and at that point, then we are able to run content validations on the file and look at the data in a more detailed fashion. So I'm going to let this, hopefully by the time we're done, we'll be able to see that this file has made its way through processing. Let me go and touch on the other items underneath the submission menu and get into structural validations and content validations a bit. I'm going to start with file layouts. This information really forms the basis of the main structural validations. So when we get your file and unzip it, the first thing we do is read through it and make sure that all of the records come in the order we're expecting them to come in, and that the records are of the length that we're expecting. I'll give you one quick note here. There are, in general, the length of the records are supposed to be 192 characters. There are some that are of a slightly different length. We will allow you to submit records that have this specific length, or we allow you to pad them out to 192 characters with some filler, so we'll accept this number or 192 for these other ones. Just to show you, you can click on details of any particular record type. So I will just look at, let's see, medical data record, and this goes into the details about the particular fields on any given record type. And you can even go further down and click on the details of a particular field, and it will give you as much information as possible about that particular field. So as I said, these record types and lengths are the main part of the structural validations. We want to make sure that what you're submitting conforms to these file layouts, and those are the basic structural validations. Now, so if your file fails one of the structural validations, you will be required to fix the file and resubmit a new file that can pass the structural validation. So this is really a showstopper if the file comes in a format where we're not sure if we can interpret it properly. So let's assume that you're able to submit a file that passes structural validations. It would then be validated with content validations. We list those here on the submission menu under validation rules. These are the inpatient validation rules. As Leanne mentioned, there are just a handful that aren't implemented fully yet, but we can see here that there are quite a few. couple hundred at least, 300 it looks like. And these content rules, by and large, the way they work is your file is validated to make sure, let's just take one as an example, that the patient control number is populated. In general, we will, let me pick a different one. Let me pick patient birth date is before admission date. In general, we check to make sure that your records meet a certain threshold. So that is to say that if I click on the details for patient birth date is before admission date, the details say that we're expecting this to be true 99.5% of the time. If it is at least that much, it will pass that validation. If not, it will fail it. And at that point, you may be able to override it by providing us an explanation. And let me touch on the different issue types. Oftentimes we'll say rule types. They kind of mean the same thing. There are 4 different issue types for content validations. You can see them here. Actually, structural is included there. I'm going to start talking about failure issue types. Failure issue types mean that if your file does not pass a failure type validation, this is essentially akin to a structural validation. There's no way to override it. The only way to remedy the situation is to go back and correct the data and submit a new file. I guess these are quasi-structural in a way. Let me look at the other type, another type of issue, which is profile. So profile issue, rules that have an issue type of profile, if you fail a rule that is a profile type, you are allowed to override that issue as long as you provide us with an explanation for why you weren't able to meet the threshold. Let's say you didn't meet the threshold of, I believe it's 99.5% for the Social Security number being populated. You might be able to give us an explanation such as perhaps there's a large number of non-citizens who visit your hospital and they don't have Social Security numbers or something like that. Other issue types, and you're able to provide us that explanation, and once you've identified that is the situation for your hospital, moving forward for the remainder of the calendar year, if that validation issue comes up again, it will automatically be overridden by that profile setting. So over time, once you've established your profile, there will be less and less need to deal with validation failures. One more type of issue is exemption. Now, exemption issues, rules with exemption type issues are allowed to be overridden, and like profiles, they will stick from submission to submission. However, these are things that the MHDO really wants to keep tighter control over, and if you go to override a failure for an exemption type, you provide an explanation, and the MHDO will be notified that you've requested an override, and they will either approve or deny your override request. So these are things that we want to keep a little more tight control over.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If they deny something that you've tried to override, like a zip code, Will they tell you if they know what the right zip code is? Because obviously you've researched it and couldn't find it.
I'm not, I think there would be a communication with the MHDO at that point about, that you've done everything you can, and I think they would work toward finding a way to approve the exemption, and if all reasonable efforts have been exhausted.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. So one last issue type is ad hoc. This is something, I guess, more akin to profile. Well, it's like profile issues in that you are allowed to override issues, validation failures without MHDO approval. However, these overrides do not stick in your profile. So if you fail the rule in 1 month and then fail again in the next month, you'll be expected to provide an explanation and override it again. Let me, at this point, show you some, I guess, concrete examples from one of the files that I've submitted where we can see the results of actual validations. Okay, so this, my file did finish processing. The files I'm submitting are completely bogus test data, so they really fail a lot of issues. I'm hoping that your files won't have hundreds of issues. Let me review. Let's go with this outpatient file. So to look at the details of the validations that were run, I click on the details link for this file, and here I can see the results of all the different validations. I'm going to sort this by element ID. I can see things that are passed and failed and overridden. I have the ability to, I guess we're really interested right now in looking at things that have failed, so I can filter this list by looking at failures. And let me also filter it based on issue type. I'll go failure issue types. So it looks like this file failed the version code validation. The version code is supposed to be left blank for these files. I can click to see the full details of this validation that was run. I can see that there's a threshold of 100%. There was only this comes in the file header, so there's only one instance, and it failed all 1 instances. If I want to see the details of the failure, that is, I want to see what values caused problems in my file, I can click on details, and this should tell me on the first line number, I had a value of GGG instead of just leaving it blank. So I can see what the actual values were, and in general you can scroll through them all. This one only has a single value that failed. Let's look at something a little more interesting. Let's look at something that failed. Let's look at something that failed an ad hoc validation. With the first one, a valid modifier, I look at the details. I can see that all of my records failed this validation. And before I looked at details, you can also view the details in a summary view. So you can either look at each individual failing value. There is also a summary value which tells you how many instances of each failing value there were. So it's kind of a rolled up report of the different failing values. So my dummied up file had these two different kinds of bad values, 100 records of each. Now, while I'm here, this is an ad hoc issue type. I'm going to want to show you about overriding a failure, but before I do so, I just want to quickly return to the list of files, the validation history, and point out that this file currently has 111 issues. I just want to show that once I override this, that issue count should go down by 1. I'm going to go back to the details. I believe this is actually the one here. Go to the details of this first failure, and I have the opportunity to click Override. And here's where I provide an explanation, valid explanation, and I submit that. And it now shows a status of overridden. And now if I return to the list of files, the submission history, we now see that the count of issues has gone down to 110. So eventually, you will be able to, after overriding all the issues or correcting all of the issue count will go down to 0, and the file status will change to passed. I did want to return to the details here and show you that once you've overridden a validation failure, you can go back and review the details of the override. So if I click on details here, it now displays the information about your explanation for why the override was applied and when it was and by whom. Now I would like to go over something that failed an exemption issue type. I'll go to failed. I will go to exemption. Here's something that failed. Look at the details. I'm going to request an override. And here we can see that now different to profile level issues, exemption level issues we try to limit to a small amount of time as possible. So we provide, you tell us for which submission period do you need this exemption to be in place. So if there's an issue with your data system, but you expect that issue to be fixed in a couple of months, you would request an exemption only, let's say, for the next 2 months. And you would provide some sort of explanation. And MHDO also would request that you give information on your proposed plan for remedying the situation. So you would submit that. And in order to get back there, I'm going to go back to failed type, go back to exemption. Why am I not seeing it? Oh, because it is now pending. Sorry. So at this point, MHDO will receive an email, and then they will review the details that you've given requesting an exemption and either approve or deny, at which point you will receive an email letting you know about whether or not they've approved or denied it. So I think that really is all have for you in terms of submission, issue resolution. I will point out one final thing, that we have a help menu where you can, if you run into any problems, where we have information for contacting the help desk and MHDO regarding compliance issues. The help menu does also contain a link to the testing instructions, which Leanne showed before. So those should be available to you. And this help menu, if I log out, it will be available to you even before you log in. I seem to have gotten rid of that accidentally. So that's all I have. I'm happy to take any questions.
What you need to correct.
Thank you, Steve. So I'm also, I know we've had some questions coming in on chat that we're happy to kind of go through at the end. I did want to just take a minute to go through a couple last slides. I'm going to take back controls from you, Steve. Let me just do that, and then I will share the PowerPoint again. I do sort of have some tips and helpful hints that I want to, let's see. Sorry, I'm just navigating back to sharing my screen. So the last section of the PowerPoint is just going through some tips and helpful hints of things that we know we've had questions about, that we know that people have encountered potentially. And so I just want to go through a couple of quick tips and helpful hints. So I think I mentioned this earlier, that there is a requirement to use the MHDO assigned 6-digit provider code for all the data submissions in the file name and file headers. And again, this is found in the portal if you don't know this number already. The next is that default values or blanks will not be accepted for MHDO assigned or provider assigned identifiers, such as patient control numbers or medical record numbers, unless otherwise instructed by MHDO Chapter 241. So if you do not have a valid value, leave the field blank. No other default values. No other default values will be allowed. So make sure you use Chapter 241 for reference of all the accepted codes, including the accepted source codes, which you'll find in Appendix A of Chapter 241. So in fields where you're expected to use another source, those code sets are listed and what source we expect you to be using. This is just a little tip about the file layout. It is a fixed width, and all loops must conform in length to the specifications in the appendices of Chapter 241. And to be able to accomplish this, spaces are inserted between text data values and zeros for fields cast as numeric. It is important to note that only spaces are valid for this purpose. Which also then brings us to our next tip. I know that at least during phase 1 testing, we are still seeing files come through with what is called overpunch monetary values, and this slide just provides kind of a quick overview of what these fields look like and what we do not accept. One of the changes to Chapter 241 is that we no longer accept these overpunch values. So if you look at the little box on the left, for the zero value, there's kind of this squiggly bracket marks. If you are not preparing your files, but you do look at them and you see these marks, you will kind of know right away that that's what we call overpunch. That used to be a way to account for positive or negative values along with the lettering system as follows. And so then the next example kind of gives what the overpunch entry would look like and what the converted value would be, and then which then corresponds to the dollar amount. So all monetary values must be submitted in numerals. Negative values will be noted with a negative sign in the leftmost position. Positive values will be entered without a sign. And so this is the example. It is assumed that the column is set at length of 10, all currency amounts are left padded with zeros, and all currency values are to be coded without the decimal. So there are separate loops for ICD-9 or ICD-10 fields, so they both should not be populated. You should have either ICD-9 loops or ICD-10 loops depending on the date of the data and if it was pre-conversion or post-conversion. The next is about the location of service field. It is a hospital assigned name used to report physician office or clinic data. That is contained in the same file as facility data. So we do allow facilities to submit multiple physician office clinics information. And if these are different than your MHDO assigned IDs, you must provide a crosswalk to MHDO of these files, of these fields, so we can understand what the location is of the services that you're using. And again, this field is required. And I'll be going into a little more detail about this. So for outpatient data filing for each department of the hospital located in the municipality of the primary hospital, it must be filed in one of the following ways. And this is taken from Chapter 241. So you'll find this information in Chapter 241. So when using the approach of incorporating multiple locations into a data file, in segment 5 of the 40 loop, that you must be populating using that unique location code. And your MHDO assigned facility ID numbers are available in the portal, and if you need new numbers or you have questions how to submit for various facilities, you can contact Silvano, and that is his contact information, and we'll provide that again later. So this is just a little more information about the location of service and the places where you can find information about what the location of service means and where it should be included according to Chapter 241. And again, just a couple more slides about the MHDO assigned ID versus the location of service. If you do have any questions about what the information should be in these fields, please be in touch. We are wanting to make sure that we have complete information in this file so we can both track and understand the location of services. And just keep in mind that the location of service is not the place of service. We do not collect that information that's on the CMS 1500 currently. And so we just want to make sure you don't confuse the two. So again, what is the location of service? There are internal departments or unit codes for which facilities can provide crosswalks. They're not necessarily the same as the MHDO provider codes. And how do we know what level of granularity? That should be Chapter 241, Section 2A3, only requires filing for each department of the hospital not located in the municipality of the primary hospital. If you want to report greater granularity, please provide us this crosswalk. So finally, before we do open it up to questions, I just wanted to review the high-level timeline. As you know, Phase 3 testing began. Instructions were sent out yesterday. I did notice that during this call, we had a number of people going in and trying to register. We won't be able to start approving those registrations until after this webinar, but I do believe we should probably be able to get through most of them today, so everyone should be able to start getting in. Starting tomorrow, we will be able to submit the Q4 2015 data. At the moment, that portion is disabled, but tomorrow that will be up and going, and again, we'll post a notification about that. We would like you to try to finish your testing. Oh, you know what? I just noticed there should be 415 dates, not 315. So those are April dates, not March. Apologies. But Phase 3 testing is complete May 6th, as written on the slide. And we appreciate as much feedback as you're able to provide during that time. And again, please use the portal for as many times or as many iterations of submissions that you would like during this test period. And during the period between the 3 testing being complete and the go-live date, we're going to take your feedback and any anything that was encountered and try to enhance what we've already been able to put up for the portal. And so those go live dates are July 11th, and what we are, the end date for the first submission period is a catch-up for Q3 2015 if it was previously not submitted in the database system. Q4 2015 and Q1 2016 data, we're hoping you're able to get in by the end of August. And so I just had I had some questions that came from the last webinar that I had on Chapter 241. And so this is just some information that came up during that webinar. I just want to provide it back. The presentation will be available afterwards. I did remember to hit the record button this time, so there will be a recording available and a copy of the slides. The recording with the closed captioning usually takes about a week to get posted, and that will be available on the hospital data submitters page of the MHGO website. So what are the different timeframes for submitting files? If a file is missing by a deadline, has not been submitted, there's 15 days. If a file was submitted and failed, there's 32 days to finish getting it through any errors. So how will you specify files so you know if they are facilities or provider-based clinics? We give a little more information about where in Chapter 241 they find that information. And the next are the record types for provider-based clinics, the same as facilities. And the record types for provider-based clinics are in the outpatient specifications. The next is asking how corrections will be submitted. This will be versioning of the files. As I mentioned, there's no editing, so you'll just be reversioning a file for submission if you find some of those blocking errors that would not allow you to make any adjustments or notations in the portal itself where you really have an error in your file that you really need to resubmit for. So that will be increasing the version number of the file. This is a little more information about the differences between data stream and file types in the file naming conventions. We do know this is a new concept, and it was a way that we're trying to best be able to understand the different data submissions that are coming in so we can most accurately track them. And finally, where can I find the most recent list of validations? That really at this point is in the portal as we showed you during the demo, but there was also a list that was available on the MHGO website if you're not quite signed in yet. And so, but the one that's really being applied is the one in the portal, and they should be 99% the same just if we were entering them in and there was maybe a discrepancy. The correct version is in the portal, but we'll try to make sure those two match. But if there's any questions, of course, let us know. Okay, so I am going to just check the chat feature to see what questions have come up. And also is if there's anything, I'll open it up, the phone line in just a moment after I go through any questions that have come in. So there was a question about Canadian addresses, and I actually, Steve, can you just take a minute to talk about how we deal with Canadian addresses? I know that we do at least validate if there's province codes provided, but I believe that we obviously wouldn't expect any U.S. zip codes or city names and how those allocations are accommodated, because we will get some Canadian information on these files.
Sure. So the question is specifically about Canadian zip codes? Or?
Yeah, how we deal with Canadian information, how that would show up in the validations, and if they would get errors for or validation failures for Canadian addresses.
Right. No, provided that they are valid Canadian provinces and zip codes, we also maintain lists that we get from the Postal Service for Canadian provinces and zip codes. I do not believe that we maintain a list of Canadian cities, however.
And so you would be, the validation, I believe, would be bypassed if it was for a Canadian, if we acknowledged it was a Canadian province.
Yes.
Steve, was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
I did. I think it's just important to mention that when I was going through showing how validation failures are overridden by providing explanations, these explanations can end up being very valuable to the end users of the data. So people, researchers who use all of this data may find it extremely useful to know why certain information is not available, and it can just be helpful for research in the end.
Leanne?
And then there was another question. Yep.
I just wanted to
go
explain
ahead.
for the submitters on profile, ad hoc, and exemption. What Steve said is very, very accurate. The explanations that we get in there wind up being stored with the data and are used for the data users. But for those that are submitting, you will often notice there are many profile overrides, and there are exemptions where, as Steve said, the MHDO maintains, because of the data quality, maintains a little bit more control on those. It is very important that if you have, for example, the population of any field is a profile, and then the validation of that field is an exemption. And to give you an example, an NPI. That an NPI is not populated, maybe that, it's not required for that build. So it's okay to state in the profile explanation that for business reasons, what needed to be populated was populated. And you take the override at that point, and you won't need the MHDO's help. However, if you are providing some sort of default for an NPI, like a phone number, 207 something, 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 main phone numbers have the exact same number of digits as an NPI, but it will never show up as valid. On most of the exemption ones, if you do not provide a valid code, you will trigger having to explain an exemption request. Whereas, if you just say that we don't have that because it was not required on the claim, and essentially you take it as a profile override, then you will leave it blank, and the next validation for the content usually says, if not blank, then the NPI or the ICD code or the revenue code must be a valid code according to this source. Okay? So as you are filling these in, remember, it's always better to explain why something is not filled in and that it's okay than to provide invalid values or defaults, which will trigger a failure for an exemption issue. And if that isn't clear, please give me a call as you're going through, because that, will really help you as far as getting through the failures and, the compliance follow-up. Okay? Thank you.
And also, I think this was mentioned earlier, but once you do set up those overrides, that the next time you submit a file, with the exception of the ad hoc validations, those will remain in place and you will not get the same ones again. We have your reason, we have a time period that reason is allowed for, and you will have a lot less issues the next time a file is submitted. So I just want to make that point clear, because it could be a little overwhelming the first time you submit a file, but keep in mind for a majority of the validation types that the next time you submit a file, those reasons will be in place. So just I have a couple of questions that have come in. I just want to quickly go over. So the question was, will the details of a failed rule provide you with the details of the account number in our system in order to correct? Steve, right now I believe we have the number of the file that is provided with the field value, and there is a question around whether they're able to provide the account number. And so I don't know if we have a response to that right now that is a little different than how we display those errors, but I think this may have been something that's been asked before, so we could look into.
Yeah, I mean, that's right. We display the line number currently, and I think we probably do need to have a discussion about if there are any issues with data sensitivity and displaying that information potentially in combination with other information.
The next question was about the expected turnaround time for each file, and only having from the period open in July until the end of August to get 3/4 worth of files in. We really want to work with you guys in this period, and I think probably the suggestion would be to start with the oldest data and work your way up, and to start to get a sense of how long that this is going to take. But we really want to work with you and just keep appraised of where everyone is in their process to be able to meet this deadline as close as we can possibly meet it. And the data are so valuable to our end data users and so important to population health in Maine, and they're really used by hospital systems and the hospitals that many of you work for. So we really are trying our best. I know there was a little bit of a hold period on data submissions, and we really want to be able to work with you to get these data in and in correctly. So we'll be able to have them available for release. So I think we'll work with you to try to figure out. I don't think at this point, since it is new, we can't really say, well, your file will be expected to take this long. It could be a very quick process since we've had this thorough test period, but we will work with you along the way and just keep appraised of your progress. Any other questions? I know it is now 2:31. I really appreciate all this time you've given us today.
Could I ask a question that, it has to do with the MHDO and HSRI have been working very closely with certain submitters who have extensive knowledge of billing practices, and we've straightened out certain issues, like, for example, that showed up on many submitters when they were saying that they were having, hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of errors on start of care date in outpatient files. Another one that came up very often in files was service dates prior to an admission. So we've been working with people who have, very good experience in billing to make sure that we are really considering the right denominator or the totality of claims. So we're taking into account the 72-hour bundling rule, that start of care is really just required on home health and hospice. So if you wind up bumping against failures, that many of them are actually, they should not be failures, if you could help us through HSRI to get information on what is wrong with the validation, that, we could make it better, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, so we're testing our system as much as you're testing yours, and so we do want the feedback of if one of these validations is being far too restrictive or should be adjusted. We want to work through that. Anything else? Well, thank you so much. As I mentioned, we'll get this information posted. We're excited for you to get in starting to use the portal, and we look forward to working with you during this period.
Thank you.
Thank you.